Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Harvest Community Church podcast. My name is Chris Quinn, an associate pastor and member at the church, and I am joined by a special guest this time, Danine Brewer, our preschool director. Welcome, Danine, to the podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
On this episode, Danine is with me to talk about a new ministry that we had just started at the church. It's called the Lift Project, and it's actually now up and running. We have people volunteering and helping out. And so we wanted to take a moment to explain more what is kind of behind this ministry, why we chose to do it, the vision, how it works, so that our people can have kind of a greater understanding of this ministry in case, when we announced it a few months ago, maybe it just kind of confused them. So Danine, why don't you describe for us what is the Lift Project and how does it work?
Sure. So LIFT stands for Living in Faith Together, and it's a project that is meant to foster discipling relationships between generations, which supports Harvest's mission of helping all people find and follow Jesus. So adult volunteers are matched with a student between the ages of 4 and 18. Whose families have signed them up for the project. All the matches are done with the permission of the parents, and the volunteers choose a general age group of the children they'd like to work with. It's intended to be a year-long commitment where the volunteer and the student get to know each other and encourage one another. It'll look a little bit differently for each matching, depending on how they choose to connect within the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've already kind of seen that operating with my youth and some of the families. I've seen some of the different ways they are relating with their volunteers, their matches. It's been pretty cool to watch so far. So, Danine, where did this idea for the Lift Project come from?
So about a year ago, a friend of mine came up to me in church and was telling me about a buddy program at the preschool where her granddaughter attended. And the church matched church members with preschool students, and they just wrote monthly notes of encouragement, maybe gave them a little gift, just kind of got to know them a little bit and encouraged them. And I thought that is a really great idea, and that's something we could put into practice in the weekday preschool. So I jotted the idea down on a sticky note and put it on my desk next to all my other good ideas that I think about and don't always act on, and just kind of kept it on my desk for a while. And so fast forward to later that fall, we had gotten into the school year, and Chris, you were giving a sermon, I think sometime in November, on discipleship.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the benefits of cross-generational discipleship.
Oh, yeah.
And it got me thinking about, what my friend had told me. I thought, okay, here it comes up again. And so I was sitting there thinking through the sermon, and I promise I did listen to the sermon.
Oh,
But
I'm sure.
as the sermon went on, I just couldn't help but sit there and think about all the people over the years who have poured into Mark and my son's lives. We didn't have family nearby when we raised our sons, and our community became our local family. And we had our neighborhood community, our school community, our social friends, and our church community, and they all helped us raise our kids and influence them in profound ways. So then I got thinking, well, how does this specifically look within the church community?
Yeah.
And so I was thinking of specific instances with our boys. And in the church we were going to, when the boys were small, there was a gentleman who was in charge of the ushers at the church. And he got to know the boys and took it upon himself to teach them how to properly shake a hand and greet somebody.
That's awesome.
And and how to strike up conversation with people. And so the boys at a very young age started being door greeters and ushers with this gentleman. And men's breakfast. They'd go to men's breakfast with my husband. He was in charge of the speaking and the cooking and things. The boys would go with and set up, and they would sit with every different age group that would attend at that men's breakfast. And to just think of the time they spent with these godly men in our church, and the things they observed, the things they were spoken to, just made really big impacts on their lives. And then a little bit later on, Our youngest was about 12 years old. He was doing some yard work for a church member who was unable to do her own yard work. And he had spent the whole day there. And Mark and I went to pick him up, and they had finished before we arrived. And when we pulled up to pick him up, he's sitting on the front patio having a lemonade with this lady, and they are just talking and laughing and having the best of times. And I thought,
That's
here's this
so cool.
12-year-old with this 70-year-old woman just chatting it up like old friends.
Mm,
And they were just having a great time together. And I thought, this is what this is about. So these kinds of memories just kept cycling throughout the sermon that I listened to detail in that you gave.
mm.
And you and I spoke a little bit afterwards, and I just kind of mentioned the idea of, this would be neat to see something formally happening in our
Yeah.
church. And so you agreed. We talked a little bit about it. I went back to my office and I put a star next to the idea on the sticky note on my desk.
Still there.
Still there. And so went on with my work week and everything. And a few weeks later, Beth and I were talking about some common projects between the weekday preschool and Harvest Children's Ministry, and this topic came up again. And so we discussed it a little bit and how this would look, maybe doing some kind of buddy program with the children's ministry. And after that, I went and highlighted the sticky
It
note.
just keeps going. It
And
just keeps
yeah,
going.
then
Yeah.
the holidays hit, and I just couldn't ignore it any longer. And so I thought about it and prayed about it in January. And then in, I think, February,
Big stuff.
contacted you and Beth, and we had a meeting and got things going, and had several meetings to see how this ministry would potentially look here at Harvest. And we launched the project in May
Mhm.
and matched volunteers with students in June. And we currently have 15 students matched with adults, and they're starting to get together. And we're hearing some really neat stories about the connections that are being made.
I love that. And because I love that because I love the personal touch you're talking about with your own boys, right? And how much of an impact that made on them to have relationships with people across the generational spectrum, you could say, at the church. And, you know, from my vantage point, getting to know them pretty briefly, but at the same time, they seem like really godly young men. So it's just
Mhm.
that can't, that had to have helped in a huge way
Absolutely.
to contribute to what has happened in their life and their value of the church and what and all that. So with that, like, why do we do the Lift project? Like, how does this contribute to the culture of disciple making we want to do here at Harvest?
So, I think it's really natural in a church setting to group our church ministries based on age or gender group.
Right.
We have the children's ministry and youth group, and maybe a seniors group, and women's ministry, men's ministry. And it's effective and makes sense. But different age groups also have so much to offer and learn from each other.
Right.
And when I speak to this, I think of our community life group that Mark and I have been in for almost 12 years. And we have varying ages, but not a huge degree of separation in ages. But most of the people in our life group are a little bit older than us,
Hmm.
and it has been invaluable to have them to speak into our lives. Their experience and wisdom has ministered to us in ways that have guided us and drawn us closer to God within this community setting. They have given us so much perspective on parenting and work relationships and health situations. And
Mm.
they have that experience, they've been through it. And there's something about older generations that can offer that perspective and experience to younger generations because they've been there. And as importantly, I think the younger generations have a lot to offer older generations.
Hmm.
My mom used to have some young children in her neighborhood that would come visit her after her kids and grandkids were grown. And to see how these children gave my mom purpose and just added to her life and made her laugh and have fun and able to experience that youthfulness again.
Mm.
There's benefits on both sides.
Yeah, and I love that because this is something I've been reading about a lot when it comes to youth ministry. That oftentimes when we create like these children's and youth ministry programs, they're really important. They're really vital to a church. But when we create them as like these individual silos kind of off to the side, we're missing the benefits of, I think what you're describing there is what the church is supposed to be,
Mhm.
this family.
Mhm.
And, when you get together with your family and you have all like your biological family and have all the generations there, and you take these pictures and you go, oh, look at the four generations, you see how beautiful those are, right?
Yeah.
That's the same thing that's supposed to happen within the walls of the church, right?
Yeah,
It's supposed to
absolutely.
be a family where we are interacting together. And oftentimes there's this fear about it. But at the same time, this is something that is put forth in scripture from what I can see. I first think of like Titus 2 1 through 10. You have older men, they're teaching younger men. Older women are you actually told to train younger women how to love their husbands and children. You see all of these relationships kind of intermix with each other in that passage where Paul is kind of recommending to Titus, like, bring these people together. This is kind of an important thing that they are working together and teaching each other what it means to follow Jesus and encourage each other
Right.
instead of being off into these, silos, which are important. Like part of my huge part of my job is the youth ministry, but not doing it as a way that it's its own separate church,
Right.
because then that just doesn't allow for the relationships. But I also kind of see when you think about the analogy of the body of Christ, right? Where Paul makes that connection in 1 Corinthians 12, where he's saying things like the eye cannot say to the hand, you are not part of the body. Well, different generations can be those different parts, right? Where they can't say to each other, we don't need you, we don't need you. Actually, it's saying we need the whole body. And I actually like Paul's sarcasm in that passage too, because he's like, the whole body can't be an eye. I mean, that's just a monstrous thing to envision, right? But it's like, we don't all want one generation within the church, right? We want multiple generations in the church giving their perspective, giving their value, but also building relationships
Right.
with each other so that it's this interconnected family.
And I think too, it's important multiple people within those different generations.
Right.
I think of my boys' grandparents, and one grandpa had very different things to offer our kids than the other grandpa because
Right.
we're all our own unique people. And it's not that you need one person of each generation, you need multiple people
Right.
and multiple generations.
Absolutely. Yeah, they've even studied this. It's the Fuller Youth Institute. They had a book they put out called Sticky Faith. And one of the things they talked about is that it just takes, I've said this before at Harvest, but it takes
Mhm.
five caring adults outside of parents. And that just elevates and increases a kid's likelihood that they are going to stick with their faith for the rest of their life.
Right.
So it just takes relationships. It just takes connection. It's all it is. It's not having the best youth program in town. It's having relationships. So if a church is really good at relationships, you're already in a much better position to have these kids follow through with their faith. And I think that's a huge, kind of underlying reason why we're doing the Lift project is because we don't
Right.
want to see these kids walk away from a faith in Christ later on once they leave the children's and youth ministries, that they would want to follow Jesus for the rest of their life. And they would look around and go, hey, I know all of these people here because I was connected in different ways.
And I think it also gives them examples of
Yes,
when, fast forward, they get to the older generations, they know how to do that with the
exactly.
younger generations. I see our
Exactly.
oldest is working in children's ministry now in
Oh,
his
that's so
church.
cool.
And to see him leading and shepherding these kids as he was when he was that age it's just beautiful to watch.
That's so cool. So let's kind of get into the nitty gritty. You talked a little bit earlier about how it works, but kind of give me a quick nutshell. What does a Lyft volunteer actually like do?
So, yeah, it starts out with gathering information, and we share the contact information of the student and the volunteer with the families.
Hmm.
And they make a connection together. And we have these papers, they're called All About Me papers.
Right.
And The students and the volunteers fill them out, and it's information such as, who's in my family, where do I live, what's my favorite food, hobbies, just some little talking points just to get to know each other a little bit, and then a picture so that when they see each other in church, they can quickly identify each other.
Mm,
And then the volunteer and the parents discuss what they want this relationship to look like and what the parameters are going to be for their interaction together. And this is going to look differently for each pairing. So after that, it's up to the volunteer and the buddy to decide how they're going to continue to connect. We're hoping for a minimum of a once a month
yeah.
connection point
Yeah.
where volunteers reach out in the form of a card of encouragement or meeting in the atrium before church to share a coffee or hot cocoa. Maybe serving together. If they're one's on the greeting team, they can serve together and greet together, maybe sitting in church together, or even just saying hello on a Sunday morning and getting to know each
Mhm.
other. We're hoping it will evolve into things such as maybe learning Bible verses together, praying together, sharing prayer requests, getting to know each other better, maybe teaching each other new skills, or the families getting together and the families getting to know each other.
Mhm.
Again, it's just going to look differently for each pairing.
Yeah, and I like what you said that it is based on a parent's desire of what they want to see,
Right.
right? So if a parent feels uncomfortable with a certain level of connection, the parent can say, "Hey, can we do this? Because it's you want to get to know them." We're doing, on our end, we've done all that we can in terms of putting in like all of these volunteers have gone through a background check.
Right.
We've sent them training packets and materials so they know what is expected of them and what not to do uh, in order to, scare off parents. But they are, but at the same time, it's still based on the parents.
Yeah, and it's the volunteers, they're encouraged to not be in positions when they're alone with the kids. This isn't meant to be a babysitting service or
Exactly.
anything like
Yeah.
that. This is a connection,
Mhm.
and it's really important how they go about that.
So oftentimes when we talk to people about these kinds of programs, there's obviously going to be some barriers and objections that people come up with, volunteers or even parents. So, what are some potential barriers and objections to the Lift project that you have encountered?
Well, I think probably on the volunteer side, I don't have enough time and I don't know enough about the Bible, would probably be two of the biggest things holding people back. And, we do lead busy lives, but that is the beauty of this project is you can put as much or as little as you want into it as long as you can commit to some monthly contact, even if it's
Yes.
just a card and a high five in the atrium. Guess what? That is one area of contact that is new for that child, for that family, and that
Mhm.
is fantastic. It gets us out of our comfort zone, it gets us meeting people.
Yes.
Um, as far as, not feeling knowledgeable enough in the Bible, um, I'm a preschool teacher. I learn as much from those kids as they learn from me. And
I
so
love it.
I think it's important to go into this realizing, the adult may be the authority and may feel like we're the ones there teaching them everything. And God will definitely use that situation in that way, but we're going to learn a lot too. And there
Mhm.
is nothing wrong with learning it together.
That's right.
Some of the best Bible verses I have learned are when I worked in Awana and helped kids
Mm,
memorize scripture verse. Well, guess what? I memorized it too, which is not an easy thing for me to do.
right.
And so sometimes we have to humble ourselves and realize that we sometimes need children to help us learn too.
Hmm. Yeah, and I like what you said. It's about the time in particular. That it's based on your schedule. It's not based on, you need to be contacting them 3 or 4 times a week. I mean,
Right,
nobody has. I mean, that's like this is a valuable ministry, but I mean, we don't have time for that.
right,
I don't even know if the kid has time for that.
right,
So it's lowering the expectations that people might put on themselves, the kind of unhealthy expectation, right? An unfair level where it's saying it's once a month, it's building a connection, it's building a relationship. I think whenever we've talked to people about this, that's kind of brought it down to them, brought down the intensity, and they're okay,
Mhm.
that actually makes sense to me. But I think I love that you mentioned the one about not knowing enough about the Bible. And it's this is okay. It's okay.
Absolutely.
You're just building a relationship. And as part of the training, we tell volunteers, hey, if there's something that comes up you don't know what to do with, and this includes maybe a question you don't know how to answer that they may ask, come to us. Come talk to us.
Yeah.
And especially if it's a youth group kid, they can just send them directly to me and I'll answer the question. That's no big deal. But also, I think saying something like, I don't know is a totally valid answer, or I don't know, let's research together is also a great
Yeah.
way to approach that.
Yeah.
I've also heard people saying something to the extent of, well, kids don't really want to hear from adults. And I will speak on behalf of teens in this way. They might act like they don't want interaction. They want it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They crave it. Um, they may not actively say that, but you can tell by the way they respond to continual investment from adults that they genuinely want it, and they
Mhm.
know they want it, and they know they need it. And so, one of the things that I try and encourage people with is even just thinking about Ephesians 2:11 through 22, where it talks about Paul talking about Jesus breaking down barriers, making two different people, making them one people. He's breaking down those barriers through the cross. And he's specifically referring to Jews and Gentiles. But I think the same can be said in our culture when it comes to older and younger generations who have a tendency to kind of stay off. It's like, no, Jesus breaks down those barriers and brings people together.
Mhm.
It's an amazing, beautiful thing that can happen. And so it's consistent investment that works the best
Mhm.
with kids and teenagers is and like consistent and also intentional and real authentic
Mhm.
connection. If you're doing it just to fulfill a checklist, they can tell, you
Right.
know. But if you're a person who is genuinely caring for them, loving them, they'll notice and it'll make a huge difference.
Yeah. We all have a desire to be important to
Yeah.
somebody.
Yes.
And speaking of younger children, they come to church, they have their buddies, and then they typically wait around while mom and dad are chatting with their buddies. And how special is it for these kids to have their own grown up buddies and
Mhm.
to have people that they
Yeah.
connect with? And um, it's really a source of pride and enjoyment for these kids
Yes.
to have these people in their lives, and it's really exciting to see.
Hmm.
I think another barrier that sometimes might happen on the family side of the pairing is families might say, "Oh, well, we have lots of family nearby, and our children have a lot of older people in their lives," which is fantastic. But again, we spoke to earlier that you can never have enough of
Hmm.
any age group in your life,
Yes.
and what somebody will have to offer your child is different than grandma and grandpa, and
Mhm.
also think about it from the perspective of what your child might be giving the volunteer who maybe
Right.
doesn't have grandchildren nearby.
Right.
There's benefits on both sides.
I totally agree. So, what are some things we've already heard, maybe some stories from some of our volunteers since we started this project about some of the connections they've already been able to make?
Yeah, so I'll speak personally. My husband and I have been matched with a sibling group, two young boys, and we started by sharing our get to know you papers.
Hmm.
And Mark and I made it a date night on our get to know you papers. We sat for like 2 hours and colored our papers and wrote little information in and put pictures on it for the kids. And then we met them in church and we gave them ours. They gave us theirs, and just talked about the things on the paper. So, right there, just getting to know each other. And on the very next Sunday, the oldest of the two boys came running up to us and knew us immediately after just that
So
one
that's
interaction.
precious.
And we don't really we know their parents a little bit, but not super well. And we certainly didn't really have a relationship with the kids where they would remember us. And just that one point of connection, and already they were seeking us out, and us them. And so we have been traveling a lot this summer. So we've been sending them postcards from wherever we go.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah.
And yeah, after our second trip, I happened to see one of them, and he came and was talking about the postcard, and he had made his own picture postcard for us. And it was actually a picture of the church. It was adorable.
That is so cute.
And just to see how proud he was to, know that he had something to give us. And I told him it would go on our refrigerator at home. And
Oh, that's
so the
awesome.
family has since invited us over. We're going to go over for a barbecue coming soon. And I think I went into this thinking this is going to be wonderful, just meeting new people and getting to speak into these children's lives, but they're speaking into our lives too. And
Yeah.
it's not just the kids, we're getting to know this precious family. And that has kind of caught me by surprise in a wonderful way
I love
as
that.
yeah, just getting to know mom and dad, and we can hopefully be a resource for them. We're a season ahead in life and we will not have all the answers,
Hmm.
but you know what, we can put our arm around them and cry with them and laugh with them and be
Yep.
community together.
Yep.
So then last night I was talking to a friend of mine who is matched with a teenage boy, and this friend of mine, he and the student are both musicians.
Mm,
And
I love it.
so they've gotten together. Well, the families have gotten together to share a meal, but my friend and the student have gotten together to just play music together
That's
and to
awesome.
teach each other new skills. And this friend told me last night that he just has been craving some kind of way he can speak into different generations' lives. And it was so amazing to hear him talk about how they're both benefiting from this relationship and having fun together. It's just about
That's
being
so cool.
together and having fun together. These are real connections that are being made. It's not just with the students and volunteers, but it's the families getting to know each other, and they're sharing God's love and growing together and following Jesus. And it's really exciting.
That is so exciting. I love that. Yeah, it's been cool to watch some of the matches that I made with the teenagers and watching them. I've just watched our volunteers just intentionally go over and say hi,
Hmm.
talk to them, introduce each other. It's summer, so they're kind of going back and forth,
Right.
but it's just, go on vacations and things like that. But it's just been really cool to watch these volunteers really step into it and do a really good job of making those very intentional connections.
Right.
So I think we're off to a really cool start. So if people hear this, could they still sign up if they wanted to?
Absolutely, on both ends. Right
Absolutely. Yeah.
right now we have, everybody on our lists matched up, but if we have more students or more volunteers that would like to, it's not a one-time once a year sign up. If somebody wants to do it, we will find you a pairing, and we
Hmm.
can do that at any point in the year.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, so typically the year goes from like, you know, June to like May of the following year, right? So that's the typical period, but absolutely. So contact Danine or I. You can do chrisq at harvestcc.org. Is it just Danine B
Yep.
at
Mhm.
harvestcc.org? So you can contact either of us. We would love to hear from you if you are interested in stepping in and helping out with this. If the Lord just inspires you from this episode.
And
Uh,
also know you don't have to look for this specific. If
that's right.
you can go make contact with anybody and get to know anybody in church. It
Yes, I
doesn't
would.
have to be a formal
I would encourage
program.
that. Yeah, if you look at and you're looking at your time and you're going, I have barely have time. That's a totally legitimate reason. You could just but make a connection on a Sunday, go out to lunch on a Sunday. Occasionally, that is ultra powerful. And
Every week, talk to one new person.
that's right, and that can make a huge, huge difference.
Yep.
All right. Well, thank you, Janine, for
Thank you.
joining me on this episode.
You bet.
Thank you all for listening, and we will see you on the next episode. Love you all.